My birthday came and went, no calls, no messages. I posted photos saying, "Celebrated my 30th with great friends." Mom commented, "Your birthday is in October." I responded publicly, "It's November. It's been the same date for 30 years. On my birthday, my phone didn't ring once and no text came through at all, and that pretty much told me everything right away. I posted photos from the night before showing how I'd celebrated turning 30 with some great friends, smiling like everything was fine. My mom even commented on the post saying my birthday was in October. I answered her right there in public and said it was November, same date it's been my whole life. I woke up on November 14th already expecting nothing, which sounds sad when I say it out loud, but after 29 years of people forgetting your birthday, you learn how to keep your expectations low so it doesn't hurt as much. My phone sat quiet on the nightstand with no buzzes or alerts, just dead silent. Sunlight came through the window of my Chicago apartment, and I made myself a cup of coffee like it was any regular Tuesday. Around lunchtime I checked my phone again, even though I knew better, and there was still nothing waiting for me. My older sister, Emily, had texted me 3 days earlier to brag about her promotion. My mom, Linda, had called the week before asking if I remembered where she put her winter coats. My dad, Mark, had sent me a message on Sunday about some documentary he thought I'd like. But on my actual birthday there was nothing at all. I looked at the date on my phone and let it sink in again. November 14th, 1994 was the day I was born, and November 14th, 2024 marked 30 full years of being alive. You'd think after 3 decades the people who raised you might at least set a reminder on their phone. This kind of thing wasn't new to me. When I turned 16, my parents threw Emily a surprise party for her 18th birthday that same weekend and honestly seemed confused when I asked what we were doing for mine. On my 21st birthday, which landed on Thanksgiving, the whole family spent dinner talking about Emily's new apartment while I sat there legally able to drink for the first time and completely ignored. When I turned 25, I spent the day by myself because Emily was having a meltdown over her boyfriend at the time, and my parents drove 4 hours to be with her. It happened so often it became a pattern I could almost predict. But just because you expect it doesn't mean it stops hurting. Around 2 in the afternoon, my best friend Caleb called. He said, "Happy birthday, man. We're still on for tonight, right?" Hearing that made my chest feel lighter right away. Caleb remembered, and he always did. We met back in college, and he was the first person in my life who ever made me feel like my existence was something worth celebrating. I told him absolutely and asked where we were going. He said we were checking out that new tapas place on Division Street called ATRO, and told me to wear something that made me feel confident, then said happy birthday again and used my name Alex. After we hung up, I felt better than I had all day. Some people at work remembered too. Ben from accounting had left a birthday card on my desk the day before. And Sophia from HR sent me a Spotify playlist called 30 Hits for 30. These people had known me for 3 years while my family had known me my whole life. The afternoon dragged on slowly while I worked from home, answering emails and finishing a proposal. My phone sat next to my laptop, and I hated how often I kept checking it, like every 20 minutes, hoping something would change. Every time there was nothing new, it felt like another small cut. 5 o'clock came and went, then 6 rolled by. At 7 I got ready to head out, pulling on a dark blue shirt I'd been saving for something special. I took my time getting ready, fixing my hair and making sure I looked good. If my family wasn't going to acknowledge this milestone, I was still going to make it matter. Dinner ended up being perfect. Caleb had invited 8 of our close friends and decorated a corner of the restaurant with balloons and streamers. Someone ordered a cake that said, 30 never looked better. We drank wine, shared plates of food, and laughed so hard my face hurt. Around 9:30, Sophia pulled out her phone and said we had to take pictures because the night was too good not to document. We spent the next 20 minutes snapping photos, group shots, raised glasses, close-ups of the cake, and candid moments of people laughing. Caleb insisted on one picture of just the 2 of us with our arms around each other, and told me to post them and let everyone know I was 30 and doing just fine. I got home around midnight, still riding the high from the night, and picked out the best photos. The caption came naturally, saying I celebrated my 30th with amazing friends, and was grateful for people who make life better. I posted it everywhere and plugged my phone into charge. Likes and comments started rolling in almost immediately from old friends, coworkers, and people I hadn't talked to in years, all wishing me a happy birthday. I fell asleep feeling content, thinking maybe the silence from my family was for the best because I clearly had people who cared. Sleep came easy, helped by the wine and the warmth of being genuinely celebrated. I didn't dream about anything specific, just flashes of laughter and clinking glasses. When my alarm went off at 7, I hit snooze twice before finally getting up, my head feeling fuzzy in a good way. Not hungover, just reminded that I'd had a great night. I made coffee and sat on the couch with my laptop, planning to get some work done early since my job allowed remote work, and I'd blocked off the morning for focus time. The apartment was quiet except for traffic outside and the old radiator making noise now and then. Around 8:30, I logged into my email and saw 43 new messages, mostly work stuff. I worked through them one by one, answering what needed immediate attention and flagging the rest. My boss, Karen, had sent an invite for a meeting on Friday to talk about my proposal, which felt like a good sign. I switched to Slack and caught up with my team, where Ben had posted a GIF of a birthday cake in our department channel with a shout-out calling me the November birthday king, and a few people added celebration emojis. Those small gestures from coworkers I'd only known a few years meant more than they probably realized. I left my phone face down on the coffee table on purpose because I didn't want to start the day checking for messages that weren't coming, but around 9 curiosity won. I flipped it over and saw all the notifications from my birthday posts, likes and comments stacked up. What I didn't see were any missed calls or messages from my family. It shouldn't have surprised me anymore, but it still did. A part of me had hoped that maybe someone would wake up, scroll through Facebook, see the posts and finally realize they'd forgotten me again. When I checked the family group chat, there hadn't been a single new message since 3 days earlier, when Emily had dropped in a recipe for butternut squash soup like nothing else in the world mattered. The last text from my mom was from Sunday, asking if I knew where she could find decent quality bed sheets. My dad's most recent message was that documentary link he'd sent Monday afternoon. That was it. I put my phone down and turned my attention back to my laptop, deciding work was the safest place for my head right then. Throwing myself into work felt like relief, and for the next couple of hours I focused on drafting copy for a client presentation, letting the familiar rhythm of writing pull me in. Marketing had always been my strong suit, knowing what people wanted to hear and how to say it in a way that landed. I couldn't help thinking how ironic it was that I could sell ideas to strangers so easily but couldn't get my own family to notice me. By 11, my brain needed a break, so I grabbed my coat and wallet and stepped outside to the coffee shop on the corner. The November air had that sharp bite to it, cold enough to wake you up but not so harsh that it chased you indoors. The sidewalks were crowded with everyday life, parents pushing strollers, students hustling along with backpacks, delivery drivers weaving through everyone. Inside the coffee shop, the smell of cinnamon and espresso wrapped around me. I ordered a latte and a blueberry muffin and grabbed a small table by the window. Outside, the city kept moving like it always did. Inside, I sat alone with my thoughts and, against my better judgment, checked my phone again. Still nothing from my family. But I did have a text from Caleb asking how the birthday hangover was treating me, and hoping it hadn't been too rough. I smiled and told him it was totally manageable, and that the night had been perfect, thanking him again for putting everything together. He replied almost immediately, telling me I deserved it and that next year we'd go even bigger, then added something that stuck with me, reminding me not to forget that I mattered. I finished my latte slowly, watching people pass by the window. A dad holding his little daughter's hand as they navigated the crowd. A couple laughing over something on one of their phones. An older woman checking her watch like she was waiting for someone. Families everywhere, people who remembered each other and showed up. I shoved the thought aside and headed back home. The rest of the day stretched out in front of me, so I filled it with useful things. I cleaned out my closet, finally tossing clothes I hadn't worn in years. I prepped meals for the week, chopping vegetables and portioning out chicken and rice into containers. I called my grandma on my dad's side, who lived out in Arizona and mostly kept her distance from the rest of the family. As soon as she answered, she wished me a happy birthday, her voice warm and steady, saying my name like it mattered. My throat tightened before I could stop it, and I told her she remembered. She laughed softly and said of course she did, reminding me it was November 14th and that she'd been there the day I was born, holding me just hours after I came into the world. We talked for almost an hour, and she shared stories about my dad growing up and family dynamics I'd never fully understood. She asked about my job, my friends, my life in Chicago. Real questions that showed she genuinely cared. Eventually she asked if I'd heard from my parents that day. I hesitated before admitting they'd forgotten. There was a long pause, then she sighed and said my dad was smart in a lot of ways but awareness had never been his strength, and that my mom got so wrapped up in Emily that everything else faded into the background. I automatically said it was fine, the same lie I'd been telling myself for years. She gently but firmly told me it wasn't fine and that I didn't have to pretend it was, saying I deserved better than being an afterthought. After we hung up, I sat there letting her words sink in. Because hearing that truth from someone who'd known me my whole life hit different. Evening rolled in, bringing that familiar loneliness that always followed good days. The celebration was over, the excitement gone, and I was left with the quiet reality of another year started. Another milestone mostly ignored by my family. I made myself a simple dinner, pasta with marinara and a side salad, and ate while watching a cooking show that didn't require me to think. My phone stayed dark beside me on the couch. Around 9, I checked social media one last time before bed, scrolling past kids' photos, political memes, and vacation shots. Then I came across my birthday posts from the night before. The photos Sophia had insisted on were getting plenty of attention, with comments from people I hadn't talked to in years wishing me well. On impulse, I read every comment, soaking in the acknowledgement from people who barely knew me. It stung realizing strangers could spare a moment when my own parents couldn't. The bitterness crept back in, sharp and familiar. So I closed the app and plugged my phone in, telling myself I wouldn't spend my first day at 30 stuck in family issues. I convinced myself tomorrow would be better. Except the next morning wasn't what I expected at all. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop, with 17 missed calls from my mom, 23 messages in the family group chat, and 6 new emails from relatives. I opened Facebook first and my stomach dropped when I saw my mom had commented on my birthday post early that morning, insisting my birthday was in October and asking why I was celebrating in November, wondering if they'd missed something. The comment had dozens of likes with her friends, distant relatives, and people from my hometown chiming in, including my Aunt Lorraine saying she was completely confused. Someone from my old high school commented under my mom's post saying they thought my birthday was October 2nd. And another person jumped in asking when my actual birthday even was, laughing like the whole thing was just harmless chaos. Then my sister Emily chimed in and backed our mom up, saying my birthday was October 14th, not November. And that was the moment my chest got tight and hot all at once. October 14th wasn't my birthday at all, it was Emily's, and she was born exactly 2 years before me, same day, different month, and somehow our parents had managed to blend us into one person in their heads. My hands were shaking when I typed my response, fully aware that hundreds of people were watching this unfold in real time, and I wrote that my birthday was November 14th, the same date it had been for 30 years, and that they could check my birth certificate if there was any confusion, signing my name Alex at the end. I hit send and watched my comments settle right under my mom's, and almost instantly the family group chat blew up. My mom demanded I call her immediately. My dad said there had been a misunderstanding and asked why I was being so dramatic in public, and Emily accused me of making a scene. I muted the chat and opened my messages with Caleb, telling him he wouldn't believe what just happened and laying it all out. He responded right away, telling me absolutely not to take the comment down and saying they deserved to feel embarrassed for once. Over the next hour, the comment section turned into a full-on spectacle. A former roommate wrote that she'd celebrated my birthday with me in November for years. Ben from work added that a birth certificate doesn't lie and that he'd always known it was November 14th, and slowly my mom's friends started unliking her comment, with a few even apologizing to me directly. My old history teacher, Mrs. Harris, commented that school records had always listed my birthday as November 14th, 1994, and wished me a happy birthday. The same message kept popping up over and over again from different people, all saying happy birthday, Alex. My phone rang again, this time my mom, and I declined it, then declined when she called back, then ignored my dad's call, then Emily's, until I finally answered when Emily called a third time. She went straight in, asking what was wrong with me and saying mom was crying and that I was humiliating her online. I snapped back that I wasn't humiliating anyone, that they had forgotten my birthday entirely, not just the date but the whole day, and that this wasn't the first or even 5th time it had happened. She tried to brush it off as an honest mistake, and I told her an honest mistake would have been calling on the wrong day, not calling at all, because November 14th came and went without a single word from anyone in my family. She went quiet and I kept going, pointing out that Mom had confidently corrected me in public about the day I was born and that now everyone wanted me to quietly fix it so she wouldn't look bad, which meant erasing proof that anyone actually cared about me. Emily accused me of being selfish and said it wasn't all about me, and I laughed bitter and sharp, telling her it was literally my birthday, the one day that was supposed to be about me, and even then I still came second to protecting Mom's feelings. Then I hung up. The comments kept rolling in, with distant relatives posting about the mix-up on their own pages, and my Uncle Robert shared my original post and wrote that he couldn't believe this had happened and that Linda and Mark needed to fix it. Around noon my mom called again, and this time I answered. She apologized through tears, saying she didn't know how she'd gotten the dates confused, and that she and my dad felt awful. I told her she got them confused because she'd always remembered Emily's birthday perfectly, every October without fail, with parties, early morning calls, and long emotional posts, and somewhere along the way that date had replaced mine in her mind. She said that wasn't fair, and I asked her what she'd done the day before on November 14th, and after hesitating she admitted she'd had coffee with a friend, gone grocery shopping, and watched a movie with my dad, just a normal Tuesday. I repeated that phrase back to her and told her that while she was having a normal day, I was turning 30 and hitting a major milestone completely alone. She tried to say that if I'd reminded them it was coming up things would have been different, and I cut her off, saying I wasn't going to apologize for expecting my parents to remember the day I was born without a reminder. I told her what was really unfair was growing up in their house for 16 years, celebrating Emily every October, watching the effort and care that went into her birthday, and waiting for my turn a month later, knowing it never felt the same. She insisted they loved me just as much, and I told her love takes action, love remembers, love shows up, and they didn't show up for me yesterday. After a long silence she offered to make it up to me with a dinner this weekend, anywhere I wanted, and I told her I didn't want a makeup dinner, I wanted a phone call on my actual birthday. Then I hung up. The anger that had carried me through the morning drained out of me, leaving behind something heavier and quieter, and the apartment felt too still. I stood at the kitchen sink with a glass of water, staring out at the building across the street where someone was already hanging Christmas lights before Thanksgiving, and it made me feel like I was watching life happen from behind glass. My phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Diane, my mom's younger sister, asking if I was okay after seeing what happened online. I told her I was fine, just tired of being forgotten, and she replied almost instantly saying she understood and that she'd always remembered my birthday was in November, adding that she'd sent a card to my parents' house on Monday and assumed they'd give it to me at Thanksgiving. The idea of a card sitting somewhere unnoticed because my parents didn't even know to look for it almost made me laugh, except nothing about any of this was actually funny. "Thanks, Diane, I really appreciate you thinking of me and reaching out like that," I told her, and she replied saying my mom had called her that morning pretty upset, and that she'd told her she needed to apologize properly instead of trying to throw money or a dinner at the problem. Hearing that gave me a small rush of gratitude because at least one person in the family was willing to be honest with my mom. I asked if she'd listened, and Diane answered the way only someone who knew my mom well could, saying I knew how she was and that she heard what she wanted to hear, but at least the seed had been planted. We exchanged a few more messages before she had to go, and when the conversation ended I felt a little less alone, but also more aware of how broken and fragile my family relationships really were. Diane was kind, but even she wasn't going to rock the boat too hard, and nobody ever did. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange in-between state where I couldn't focus on work, didn't want to touch the ongoing Facebook chaos, and was too restless to just sit still. I cleaned my apartment even though it was already clean, alphabetized my bookshelf and reorganized my junk drawer, tossing expired coupons and old tangled charging cords, doing anything I could to keep my hands busy and my mind from spiraling back to the same questions over and over. Why wasn't I enough? What had I done to deserve being second place in my own family? And was it something about me, or would any second kid have ended up like this? Around 4 o'clock my phone rang from an unknown Chicago number, and I almost ignored it thinking it was spam, but something told me to answer. I said hello, and a woman's voice asked if I was the birthday guy from Facebook, sounding amused and curious. I asked who she was and she apologized and introduced herself as Brianna, saying she was friends with Caleb and had seen my post and the whole comment mess, and felt like she had to reach out. Confused, I sat down on the couch as she explained she ran a podcast about family dysfunction and setting boundaries called Blood Doesn't Mean Blind Loyalty, and that my story was exactly the kind of thing her listeners related to. My first instinct was to shut it down immediately because the last thing I wanted was to air my family drama to strangers online, but then I realized I'd already done that by leaving the comment up, and something about the idea appealed to me, the chance to talk openly with someone who understood that family ties weren't automatically sacred just because of biology. I asked if I could think about it, and she told me there was no pressure at all, that she'd text me her contact info and I could reach out if I decided I wanted to, reminding me they recorded remotely so I wouldn't even have to leave my apartment. After we hung up, I sat there turning the idea over in my head, imagining my story being told to thousands of people, knowing my mom would hate it and Emily would probably never speak to me again, and that thought made me smile for the first time all day. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, saving Brianna's number and adding a note that said podcast about family boundaries, consider it. By the time Caleb came over that evening, my emotions were in a weird place, somewhere between numb and painfully alert, like I was watching my own life from the outside. He showed up with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, and we sat on the couch eating lo mein straight from the containers while he scrolled through his phone and told me my comment had over 400 likes and that people were really on my side. I told him I didn't feel victorious at all, just exhausted, and he said that was because I wasn't being petty, I was hurt and there was a difference. He put his phone down and looked at me seriously, telling me I'd done the right thing, and that my family needed to see that their forgetfulness actually had consequences. We finished eating, opened the wine, and sank deeper into the couch while the city noises played in the background, sirens, car horns, and the low rumble of the train a few blocks away. Sitting there wrapped in blankets with my best friend, I felt grounded for the first time since all of this started. I asked him if I could ask something and he said always, and I asked if he honestly thought I was being too harsh, not the supportive best friend answer but his real opinion. He took a sip of wine and said if he was being honest, he thought I'd spent 30 years being too gentle, and now that I was finally standing up for myself it felt extreme because no one was used to it, but from the outside all I'd done was post a birthday celebration and correctly state my birth month, which wasn't harsh at all, just factual. When I told him Emily had called me selfish, he said her entire identity was built on being the center of attention, and me challenging that made her uncomfortable. He pulled his knees up and told me he'd watched me shrink myself for years, always the afterthought in family stories, always making excuses during holidays for why they forgot me or put my sister first, and that I'd been so patient and understanding that they never had to change. Hearing it laid out so clearly made my chest tighten, and I admitted I'd always thought that if I was just patient enough they'd eventually see me, but Caleb shook his head and said people who don't want to see you just take your patience as permission to keep ignoring you. We sat quietly for a while, the wine bottle half empty and the takeout containers pushed aside, until I mentioned that someone had reached out about a podcast interview on family boundaries and dysfunction. His eyes lit up immediately, and when I said it was Brianna, he admitted he might have mentioned my situation when he ran into her at yoga, saying he'd planted a seed but that I didn't have to do it, he just thought talking to someone objective might help me process everything. I swirled the wine in my glass and said my mom would lose her mind if I took this beyond Facebook, and he asked whether that was a reason not to do it, or a reason to seriously think about it, and the question hung in the air between us. I honestly didn't have an answer yet, and over the next few days the Facebook post kept taking on a life of its own. Some reactions were incredibly supportive, with people opening up about their own forgotten birthdays or years of feeling overlooked by family, while others came in sharp and judgmental, mostly distant relatives or old family friends insisting I was just chasing attention and that family issues should stay private. One comment hit harder than the rest, written by a woman named Carol who'd gone to church with my parents for years, saying I was being disrespectful, that my mom had made a simple mistake, and that I was crucifying her in public when families are supposed to forgive. I typed out 3 different replies and erased them before finally posting that families also remember each other, and that 30 years of simple mistakes add up. Carol never replied, but a couple of people liked what I said, which felt like quiet confirmation. My inbox filled with private messages, most from people I barely knew. A former coworker telling me her parents forgot her college graduation. A girl I went to high school with admitting she spent every holiday feeling invisible next to her siblings. Even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 10 years confessing she'd always noticed how differently my parents treated Emily and me. Reading all of it made something click because my story wasn't special or unique, just another version of the same wound, the pain of not being seen by the people who were supposed to see you first. On Friday I had my meeting with Karen about the proposal, and she started by wishing me a happy birthday after seeing it mentioned in the company newsletter, then smoothly shifted into timelines, budgets, and client expectations, and the normal rhythm of work grounded me more than I expected. Afterward, Ben caught me in the hallway and asked if I was okay after seeing some of the Facebook chaos, and I told him honestly I didn't know yet, to which he joked that if his family forgot his birthday he'd be posting their addresses online, and for the first time all week I laughed without forcing it. Work became my refuge after that, a place where I was competent and valued for what I did, not compared to a sibling who always shined brighter, but evenings were harder, alone in my apartment with constant notifications and the quiet knowledge that my relationship with my parents and my sister had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. On Sunday, exactly 1 week after my birthday, I called Brianna back and told her I'd do the podcast, making it clear I wasn't looking for revenge or trying to tear my family apart, just wanting to talk honestly about what it feels like to be forgotten, and she said that was exactly the kind of conversation they aimed for. We scheduled the recording for Tuesday evening, and after we hung up I sat with the weight of what I'd agreed to, knowing it might upset my family even more, but also knowing it was another chance to be heard by people who understood. The prep questions came Monday morning, thoughtful without being invasive, asking when I first noticed the difference in how I was treated, how I coped, what finally pushed me to speak publicly, how accountability and relationships coexist, and what healing would even look like for me. I spent that night writing out answers, struggling to name moments I'd buried for years and admit how much they shaped me. And by Tuesday I was nervous enough that I changed clothes 3 times even though it was audio only. At 6:55 I joined the virtual room, Brianna appearing calm and professional, and when she asked if I was ready I took a deep breath and said yes. The interview ran 90 minutes, flowing more like a conversation than an interrogation, with Brianna sharing pieces of her own story, and I found myself opening up about childhood memories I hadn't revisited in years. When it ended I felt drained but lighter, and when she said the episode would resonate with a lot of people and would go live the following Monday I believed her. I logged off and sat alone in my apartment, aware I might have burned another bridge with my family, but also aware I was done apologizing for taking up space. I left the post up despite repeated requests from family members insisting I was being vindictive, and when my Aunt Diane called trying to mediate and saying family matters should stay private, I reminded her she'd been one of the people questioning my birthday publicly. 3 days after my birthday, a package showed up with an expensive bracelet and a short note from my parents, and a week later Emily texted saying our mom was still upset, that she couldn't even open Facebook without seeing comments about it, and asking if I'd made my point yet and could please delete the post, and I responded. Why did her discomfort matter more than mine, I asked, and the answer came back fast saying it was because she was our mother and I was her son, and that had to count for something. But when I replied that it did count, that it had counted for Lauren for 30 years and it could count for me once, she never wrote back. As Thanksgiving got closer, Margaret called and asked if I was coming home for the holiday, and the question felt heavy with everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to stay away and avoid the tension I knew would sit at the table, but another part of me refused to disappear just because I finally asked to be seen, so I told her I'd be there. The day went exactly the way I expected, thick with discomfort, my parents hovering too much, giving me the best seat, serving me first, asking over and over if I needed anything, while Lauren barely said a word and her husband Eric filled the silence with small talk about work. During dessert, Paul cleared his throat and said they wanted to say something, and I braced myself for a big apology that never really came, just Margaret saying they realized they hadn't always been as attentive as they should have been and wanted to do better. I waited, but that was apparently the whole speech, so I just said okay. Paul added that they were going to start setting reminders on their phones for birthdays, holidays, and important events, and even though it hurt that they needed alarms to remember their own kid, I nodded and said it sounded like a good start. Lauren finally spoke and asked if we could move past it since it had been 2 weeks, and I corrected her calmly, saying it had been 30 years and 2 weeks was just when it became public, and the table went silent. Margaret stared at her plate, Paul focused hard on his wine, and Eric suddenly found his pie fascinating while I explained that I wasn't trying to be cruel, but they didn't get to decide when I stopped being hurt or put a timeline on my healing just because my pain made them uncomfortable. Margaret cried, Lauren shot me a look that could freeze water, but I didn't back down, and after dessert I helped clean up, said goodbye, and drove back to Chicago feeling lighter than I had in weeks, surprised at how unfamiliar it felt to stand up for myself. December brought a shift, with Margaret calling a couple times a week just to talk, Paul sending articles he thought I'd like with actual notes explaining why, small things but steady ones, while Lauren and I stayed distant because her whole identity had been built on being the favored, successful one, and she wasn't ready to look at what that meant. On Christmas Eve, a card showed up with a 3-page handwritten letter from Margaret, full of childhood memories, specific apologies for forgotten birthdays she could remember, and an admission that she'd put Lauren first without really understanding why, ending with her asking not for immediate forgiveness but for a chance to be the mother I deserved. I read it twice and called her, telling her I got the card and believed every word, but also making it clear this wasn't about one birthday. It was about a lifetime of feeling invisible and watching Lauren get everything while I was told wanting the same made me selfish, and she quietly said she finally saw that now. I told her I wasn't going to shrink myself anymore, delete proof that I mattered, or apologize for expecting basic respect, and she said she wouldn't want me to, admitting my strength was something she should have encouraged, not shut down, and we talked for over an hour in a way that felt like an actual beginning. Christmas Day felt different, with Margaret cooking my favorite dishes, giving thoughtful gifts, and introducing me to relatives by actually talking about my life, and before dinner Lauren pulled me aside and surprised me by apologizing, admitting she'd cared more about our mom's image than my feelings and that facing how I was treated meant facing how easy she'd had it. I told her that was true, and when she said she wanted to try to be a better sister, I told her I needed actions, not words, and she said she understood. The Facebook post stayed up, still getting the occasional comment, becoming a clear line that said this is what happens when you forget me, and I didn't lose sleep over the family members who cut me off because anyone who cared more about embarrassment than my hurt wasn't someone I needed. The people who mattered were the ones who showed up, like Jake hosting New Year's Eve and raising his glass at midnight to being 30 and finally putting myself first, and as I clinked glasses with people who truly saw me, my phone buzzed just after midnight. A message popped up from Margaret that read, "Happy New Year, sweetheart. Your father and I are so proud of the man you've become." And 2 minutes later another text came in from Paul saying he was already looking forward to celebrating my 31st birthday in November, and that it was marked on his calendar. The words were simple, but they felt real. So I saved both messages without hesitation. I knew the work wasn't finished, that my parents would still mess up, that Lauren would slip back into old habits, and that family gatherings would never be completely easy, but something important had changed because I'd stopped waiting around for them to validate me and started doing that for myself. Jake noticed the smile on my face and asked if something good had happened, and I told him yeah, it was just my parents remembering I exist, to which he grinned and said that sounded like progress, and I agreed it really was. The birthday post stayed pinned at the top of my Facebook page, not out of spite, but as a reminder to them and to me that I'm November 14th and always have been, and that I'm done letting anyone forget it. Miles away in my childhood home, Margaret stood looking at the framed photo of her 2 kids on the mantel, and for the first time noticed how many pictures showed Lauren alone compared to the few that included me, and she made a quiet mental note to start changing that, because some lessons come late but they still matter. At 12:30 a.m. on January 1st, 2025, I stood out on Jake's balcony staring at the Chicago skyline and felt something I hadn't felt in years, something steady and warm that wrapped around all the bruised parts of me and held on tight, a sense of belonging that didn't come from forcing anyone to see me, but from finally seeing myself. 30 years to learn that lesson felt long, but better late than never. The night air was cold but clean, the kind of cold that clears your head instead of biting, and below us the city buzzed with distant cheers, fireworks popping out of sight, and laughter floating up from nearby buildings as I leaned on the railing and let it all sink in. Jake cracked the balcony door and asked if I was okay, and I told him I was just thinking, so he stepped out with a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders and nudged me, saying that whole birthday mess hurt like hell, but look at me now because I'd drawn a real boundary. I exhaled and watched my breath cloud the air, and he cut off my uncertainty by telling me I did stand up for myself and everyone saw it, especially the people who needed to. I thought about how different my parents' messages felt lately, how Margaret listened instead of defending, how Paul was actually making effort, how Lauren's honesty had been awkward but real, and I admitted they were trying, and Jake nodded and said they probably would screw up again, but now they knew the stakes. We stood there quietly, the skyline glittering like it was offering choices, and for the first time I realized that no matter what happened on my next birthday, my worth wasn't tied to who showed up. Inside, the music got louder and people started dancing, and Jake laughed and pulled me back in, where friends cheered and handed me champagne and shouted my name, and hearing those voices remember me made my throat tighten in the best way. The room was warm, the lights soft and golden, and I smiled so hard my face hurt. After one, people slowly filtered out with hugs and promises, and when the place was empty Jake dropped onto the couch complaining about his feet and soul, making me laugh as I kicked off my shoes and sat beside him while he told me he was proud of me. And I really looked at him, this friend who had shown up for every milestone and changed how I understood connection, and I thanked him quietly. We talked about next year and how he swore my 31st would be even bigger. And eventually we cleaned up together before I headed home close to 3 in the morning. My apartment felt peaceful when I walked in, almost sacred, and after washing up and changing, I sat on the edge of my bed thinking about everything that had happened, the birthday, the public fallout, the hard conversations, the podcast, the boundaries, and the strength I didn't know I had. It wasn't neat or easy, but it was mine. Before sleeping, I checked my phone one last time and saw a voicemail from Margaret sent just before 1. And when I played it, her voice came through soft and shaky as she thanked me for being honest, for giving them another chance, and promised she would work every day to be the mother I needed, ending with a quiet Happy New Year and another promise to celebrate my birthday in November. I set the phone down with my eyes stinging, not because everything was fixed or because trust was automatic, but because it finally felt like a beginning, real and imperfect. And as I turned off the light and listened to the city hum, I understood something clearly at last, that belonging doesn't come from being chosen by others, it comes from choosing yourself, and for the first time in my life I had.